Building a bridge in City Skylines is easy, but what if you want to build a nice looking bridge or a highly customized bridge so it perfectly fits your situation in your city? In this video, I will try to cover most of the techniques that you can use, basic and advanced, to build any kind of bridge structure you want with using just a couple of useful mods. Okay, so just so this tutorial is kind of complete, I'm going to go over the very basics, okay? But you probably all know this. Now, I'm going to be using the Fine Road tools because this mod allows me to control which type of the road is being built. And also I'm going to be using Fine Road Anarchy, and you can also see that in this toolbar I have the Node Spacer mod, which especially for bridges is very, very useful. Now, if you take any kind of road, the basic road, then the vanilla roads, then you can build them obviously on the surface. But with Fine Road tools, you can choose so that they are going to be built elevated. Now, the elevated and bridge segments, as you can see here, they are like two separate types. But for the basic roads, you probably know all this. They are the same, except pillars are changed. Yeah, the pillars are slightly different. Now, you definitely noticed that if you do build some kind of a bigger road in City Skylines and you do build it as only elevated, then it's just going to be this slab of a road with the structure below it. Let me actually, using Move It, let me bring it slightly higher so we can see what's going on below, because that's kind of going to be important later. Now, if you're going to build the same road with the bridge type, then it's actually going to build the nice arch on this kind of a road. So that's one way to control the very, very basic way to control bridge types in City Skylines, using the Fine Road tools and changing the elevated to bridge. Now, obviously, highways, vanilla highways also have this. Which one, for example? This one. Yeah, if you're going to do the bridge, then it's going to do the suspension bridge, even though it's not exactly looking all that accurate to real-life suspension bridges. The cables are not really supposed to look like this, but you know, we can all change that later with some more custom techniques. Now, obviously, if you do it just elevated, it's not going to do the bridge, all right? So we all know that. Now, certain roads that you download from the workshop can have different behavior. Now, for example, this is the pack of roads which are called Highway Over Wall, just like that. And they are actually very, very interesting because the elevated version is exactly that. It's a highway over wall, so it might create some kind of retaining walls, embankments, you know, something like that. It's actually very useful for interchanges as well. But if you're going to do the bridge type, then it's actually going to do a bridge with pillars and everything. And certain roads from the workshop, this is for example the German countryside road or something like that, they might even have the elevated and bridge segments exactly the same. So the bottom line of this very basic technique is that just using the Fine Road tools, you can just change the elevated and bridge types, and you can, you know, control these kinds of different structures for roads that do have these differences. So either the vanilla roads or some kind of roads from the workshop. Now, railways have exactly the same thing. So this is the basic elevated version of the vanilla tracks. If I choose the bridge type, then it's just going to do different pillars and this truss beam on top of it. We all know that. Now, certain railways that you download from the workshop, especially the railway collection, and by the way, there is going to be the second railway coming soon, I guess, when this video was made, then these already have some very nice looking bridge structures. Now, most of these tracks, they are separated. So basically, I don't know, for example, this track, it doesn't really do the bridge types. It doesn't really do elevated pretty much at all. It does these kinds of types that don't have pillars or any kind of bridge structures, which might be useful for some detailing of like elevated train stations, train yards, or something like that. But if you do want to use bridges, then you do need to use separate networks. That's kind of how this pack works. But even in the railway collection, there are a couple of bridges. For example, there's Hohenzollern Bridge that is different between the elevated and bridge types. And usually this is written in the description of these assets, so just, you know, pay attention when you download them. But you can just experiment with that in the game and immediately see those differences. So if I do the elevated and if I do the bridge, then they are kind of looking similar. By the way, all of these complicated arch bridges, you need to build them across two segments. As you can see, if I only do it at one, it's just going to do one half of the arch. Anyway, the elevated and the bridge types are different in the height of the arch. So that's one example. And there is also the Piacenza Bridge, the Italian, very nice looking high-speed rail bridge. That's also different. The standard Bridge type is this very, very nice cable stayed structure, and the elevated type is only just a normal, regular concrete beam like this. So that's looking very, very good. So the bottom line of this part is that you can download from the workshop really nice looking bridges, especially for the railways, that are just going to work straight out of the box. You don't really need to do any kind of changes. You're just going to point and click and build the bridge, and it's going to be functional. And also the structure of the bridge is going to be part of that one network, okay? So it's going to be decorative and functional both in just a single segment. That's kind of the point. But now we want to get into the actual customization, the actual part where we are going to take the functional network, so for example a road or a railway without any kind of bridge structure, and we are going to add the bridge structure to it so that it's going to be highly customized and it's going to be exactly what we want, okay? So moving on. The custom bridge making, I would divide into three basic categories of techniques that we will be using. So the first one is what I would call something like a two-network technique. Basically, we will have the functional network, road, railway, and the decorative network, the structure, is also going to be a network. So for example, this one, as you can see, yeah, it's a network. Or we can even have a functional network, but only use it as a decoration. But I will return to this later. The second technique is going to be, again, for the normal functional network to be, well, yeah, road, railway, something like that. That's going to be where the traffic is going to go. And the structure is either going to be a building. If you download these kinds of bridges from the workshop, then they are buildings, usually found in the electricity tab. There's going to be a new tab, small roads or water structures or something like that. And then we can also use props. Some of these are downloaded from the workshop and they are props, okay? Now the third technique, probably the most advanced one, is making your own completely custom structures using networks, procedural objects, or even functional networks and things like that. Now let's start with the two network technique, okay? So this is very simple. You have the decorative network, as you can see over here, but you actually need to add the bridge. So this cable stayed structure, this is called the CSUE bridge. Let me see if I can quickly find it. Oh, I already had it here. As you can see, it's the Yangtze bridge. Yeah, it's the small road category bridge, but it's kind of intended for highways, of course. And there are many more like it in the workshop, by the way. This is just like a very quick example. So I'm just going to take the highway over wall road, the highway, the elevated, or sorry, the bridge type. And I'm going to use the alignment function with move it, which is going to be very handy with this technique. And I'm just going to move it into the bridge. I'm going to do it very fast, but if I really want it to be super precise, I'm just going to hold Alt with move it, which is going to snap to the center node. Now, this kind of network technique, as you can see, these kind of decorations are made for one type of roads. And if you are going to use, for example, this road, as you can see, it's wider, right? So it needs to be a bit customized. Now, of course, using with move it the picker function might be useful to just pick the road or the decoration to then move one or the other. Now, node controller mod is going to be absolutely essential for this technique. So for example, this decoration already comes with this belly of the bridge, and it's kind of narrower, but obviously using the node controller, I can just make it wider. It's also going to slightly increase the width or the spacing between the wires. It's also going to make the wires slightly wider, but you know, if you're not going to go that crazy with this stretching, it's going to be fine, all right? Now, also, this pylon is not exactly looking that great, but unfortunately, the pylon is a building, so you cannot use the node controller on it. But we do have, obviously, the procedural objects mod. So with move it open, I'm just going to hit Shift P, convert the pillar where it stands into procedural objects, and then I'm just going to go into the scaling function. I'm just going to scale this axis slightly to the sides, as you can see, very, very quickly, and that's it. Now the pylon goes how it should be on the sides of the railing, of the side of the edge of the road, okay? Now, the second technique the second sub-technique for this two-network technique would be related to functional networks, again, for some different types. So I already showed this in the previous video for the node controller, but let me just do it here again. And this is probably something that's going to make the authors of these kinds of bridges very uneasy, because I'm just going to be using them for roads. But, oh well, sorry, Revo, if you're watching. Now, this technique makes it very, very simple. Again, you're just going to make the road go into the bridge. You're going to hide the features of the bridge that you don't want there. So for example, the railing and, well, obviously the rails that used to be there. And you're just going to, with the node controller, stretch the structure of the actual bridge. Now you should use decorative networks that are kind of similar shaped, similar sized to what you actually want them to be as when they are finished, because as you can see, when I'm just going to increase the size of this bridge to like 250, then it's already going to have the model quite distorted, maybe more than I would like. So, but you know, as an example, this is more than enough, just showing you this technique, how you can use it. Anyway, moving on, we are now going to go into the structures that are either buildings or props. Similar situation as before. So we are just going to take the functional network. So we are going to take this road again, using move it. I'm going to align it to the building. Yeah, usually these kinds of props or building are made perpendicular to the networks. Not sure why, but even if you align it like this, you can obviously then copy paste it, rotate it 90 degrees. I think I made it twice there, yeah, and it's going to be fine. Let's make sure that we are only moving the nodes here, and we're just going to move it into the bridge. But as you can see, the structure is not exactly wide enough for this particular road. Well, what I could do is I could just make the structure twice. As you can see, I'm just going to copy paste it with move it, and this might already be enough. Or I can just go and use procedural objects, which is, you know, just a tool that's going to allow me to be very precise and highly customize everything I touch with it. So I'm just going to, again, with move it open, I'm going to hit Shift P while selecting the bridge structure, and just like before, I can just use the scaling function very quickly without touching the individual vertices and just stretch the bridge like this. Now, beware. Some structures of bridges that you download from the workshop, and even in this one, you can notice that certain elements of the bridge were not converted into procedural objects. In this particular case, the pillars. That's not really that big of a deal because I have all kinds of pillars at my disposal. Probably mostly, well, even from the vanilla game, but also these kinds of pillars from the railway collection. They cannot be really built like this. You either have to convert them into procedural objects by default or build them alongside a road and then copy paste them in. But there is no like a general advice here. You know, certain bridges are just made differently, so you know, some can be converted into PO and some cannot. That's just the way it is. Now that I have the bridge converted into procedural object, I can do absolutely anything with it. And this kind of overlaps with, you know, just some kind of a guide for procedural objects, but this video is not really supposed to be it. So I'm just going to quickly go over some possibilities which you can do here, okay? So for example, this bridge, as you can see, it's not really made for a straight road. So what I could easily do is I could just take the entire bottom part of the bridge. I'm just going to look at the bridge using this view. Hopefully I'm not going to select any vertices that I shouldn't. So I'm just going to select all of this. I'm going to click flatten selection, and look at that. Now I have it perfectly flat. Obviously a bit more flat than I would want to because I also flattened the lower beams, but you know, you probably get the idea what I'm trying to show you here. Okay, so you know, these kinds of customizations. Of course, I can also have the bridge not on the top of the functional network or the structure. I don't need to have it on top of the functional network. I don't need to have a lower deck, so-called, of the bridge structure, but I can also put it below, which might, you know, make it look better if the road is already going very high and I just don't want the bridge to overshadow some kind of buildings around or, you know, things like that. So this is something that I actually used in Altengrad, this very same bridge. I'm just going to go into edit and I'm going to go and rotate it by the x-axis to 180 degrees. I then need to make it higher because the centroid is actually much below or now higher than the structure. And look at that. I'm just going to have it exactly like this. Let me just move it a bit higher because this bridge is obviously intended to be very, very tall. I would, of course, with move it, delete the existing pillars of this bridge, only to have the network, and I would make it on top of the structure and obviously stretch it all the way to the ends. Then I would take some pillars, some custom pillars that I have. So for example, I'm just going to go into find it, type in a pillar, and what do we have here? Some of these pillars from the railway, you know, all of these different. Yeah, I kind of like this one. This is actually exactly the same one I used with Altengrad Bridge, and I'm just going to, you know, put it in here. If I really wanted to align it perfectly, I'm just going to put it like this. I already converted it to procedural objects because I know I'm going to be stretching it. I'm just going to go into move it, select it, and hit Control E, which is my shortcut for aligning, and align it with the structure. And I'm going to go back into procedural objects and put it exactly below these kinds of bends, which are kind of indicating that there's supposed to be a pillar there anyway. Okay, now the pillar is a bit short, so I'm just going to stretch it like this. I'm going to basically take 1/2 of it and do something like this with it. And I'm just going to have a nice little bridge made super fast. Now, all of these kinds of changes you can do even with the props. So let's say that, let me just pick up some of these small roads here for this purpose. Because this is much smaller structure. Again, if I wanted to align it, I'm just going to do this. It's going to be perpendicular, no problem. I can just move it, rotate it 90 degrees with a copy. I'm going to put it inside like this, and let's just say that I would really like to have the road like that, with the arch being all the way above the road. By the way, this kind of structure would be called a through arch bridge or a through deck, which basically means that the arch is kind of like in a middle position. This would be with a lower deck, and of course this would be with a high deck with the structure completely below the bridge. But let's just say I really wanted to have this, but these kinds of how do you call them, cables tensions or something like that, they are not exactly going all the way to the road. Well, obviously I can just use procedural objects. I can just convert it into PO, and using page down button in here, well, actually I can just do it for all of them at once. Of course, this one is intended for completely flat roads. So yeah, just customization like that, very easy. And finally, let's introduce the last technique, which is going to allow us to go completely crazy, because we are going to be able to create completely custom and our own bridge structures, okay? And we are going to be using a couple of basic elements that I'm going to introduce. So, for example, we're going to be using already existing structures for the bridges, even the functional ones, just like before with that first technique. Or we can use all these different kinds of beams and girders and everything. We can even use kind of unorthodox networks. We can use, I don't know, railings on the sides of roads, or we can, for example, get these kinds of third powered rails made by Revo for metros, or, you know, different kinds of stuff as well. I, for example, saw Imperator use monorails to build cables for a cable stayed bridge. Okay, so all of these things are possible. Now I'm going to show you a couple of more elements, but we're just going to quickly go and do some custom bridges, okay? So let's just assume that I want to build like an arch, okay? Let's just build an arch first. I'm going to show you very quickly, not really a complete bridge, but just an arch. So let's, for example, take the City Walks beams here. I'm only going to be needing a single segment like this. And I'm just going to use the same technique as I showed you before with the node controller. So I'm going to go with the node controller, and I'm just going to go with the vertical direction. I'm going to put it to something like, I don't know, 0.8, for example. And then on both sides, I'm just going to go 0.9 on the backwards direction, which is going to nicely clear it up. And look at this. We can create our own custom arches very simply. I would then probably just copy paste it like this, make it on both sides of some kind of a road. Then I could take, I don't know, for example, this cable, even though it's not going to be cable in this particular case, but that doesn't really matter. In our situation, I would probably, for example, do this. Then I would copy paste it with move it, and you know, just put it into all of these different all of these different places create these kinds of ties. Now, unfortunately, networks cannot be made to go completely vertical, okay? I can easily demonstrate that, yeah, with any kind of network, because all of them are going to behave the same. So let's just take this one, for example, and see what I mean. So if I make it more and more diagonal, let's say, then the actual network is gonna start becoming thinner and thinner and thinner. Yeah, you can see that. But if I also wanted to make it go completely vertical, then yeah, you can see that it's getting thinner, 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 and eventually it's going to go completely flat. And even the texture is just not going to work. It's going to be all mangled and weird, right? So unfortunately that doesn't work, and we have to use either props or procedural objects. So we can take, for example, I don't know, you have all kinds of pillars. So let's just say that I want to take this pillar, and I'm just going to maybe make it smaller with scaling down so it's thinner, and then I'm just going to create some kind of a, yeah, just like before we did with those procedural object arch bridges straight out of the box. We're just going to make our own, and then I can just take you know, for example, the roads that I already had here and put them on top of my newly created bridge. And either, just like before, I can put it on the top of the arch, or I can just make it go, you know, lower. I already prepared it here with these tensions down here, so it's obviously intended to be looking something like this. Now, by the way, one very important thing when making these completely custom bridges is to use the bare roads made by KJ. For example, so I already introduced this road before. These roads are just like that, just like the surface. They are not having the sidewalks, they don't have the pillars, they don't have the structure. They are completely thin, flat like this, okay? And by the way, you don't need to use these bare roads only if you want to have these kinds of completely flat roads, but you can also use any kind of road in the game, but you have to do a couple of extra steps, because you need to use the ground segment. Or, I mean, you can do the elevated if you don't mind the structure of the bridge, but if you want to create your own, then you need to use the ground segment, but it's going to bring the terrain higher towards it. So you then need to use the terraforming network. You would make the terraforming network with node controller much wider by like 1000%, something like that, doesn't really matter. So 10 times wider, or 10,000%, doesn't matter really at this point. And you're just going to move it so that it goes directly below the road, something like that. Now, in this case, you are definitely going to use the Rotterdam mod, which is going to get rid of those weird shadows on the ground segments, okay? Now, obviously, we now have this void. So one thing to get rid of it is to use ploppable pavement or all of those decorative networks. So, for example, I'm not really sure if I have a grass surface network. Yeah, I do. So you could, for example, cover it with that if you wanted to. But if this is going to be a bridge that's going to go over water, then obviously this is going to be a tiny bit more complicated. But on the other hand, maybe not, because, you know, the water is just going to hide any kind of inconsistencies with the detailing below it. So yeah, it is possible to use any kind of network for the bridge, even for the customization. But the bare bridge roads by KJ are the easiest to work with, as you can see. Let me show you one kind of almost complete example of a bridge, okay? Let's, for example, start with this one. So I'm using an already functional network, but I'm going to kind of use it as a decoration, kind of. And let's say that I want to make a double-decker bridge, okay, with railway below, road above. Now, I would like to create some kind of a pillar in the center in here, and I don't really want these transitions, okay? So I can, for example, take the node controller here on the edge. I can go into the backward direction. I'm going to put it to some kind of negative number, maybe minus 0.1. I need to also do it on the other side, otherwise the texture or the model is going to be a bit distorted. Kind of favoring one end, so I need to make sure that it's the same on both sides, okay? Now, let's just say that I would like to have this pillar kind of go around this lower structure, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the building with move it, I'm going to hit Shift P, convert it into procedural objects. I'm now going to make it go slightly higher. and gonna go into customization, and I'm just going to clip 1/2 away. Just completely going to get rid of 1/2 of this bridge, okay? And then I'm just going to make it go to this one end only, all right? And if I really wanted to, I could also get rid of this like a top, which is supposed to be the rest for the actual contact with the structure, all right? So that is this flat. Then I can obviously copy paste it, put it on the other side, all right? So that it's kind of where it's supposed to be, okay? Just like this. Then I would take the road. So this one, just like before, I would probably with the network multi-tool, let me actually put 2 segments on it. I would take the nodes, align it move it to the bridge, and then holding Alt, I'm just going to perfectly put it on top of the bridge, all right? So just like that. Obviously, these pillars are now going into the road, so I would need to make the pillars even thinner on the sides, but I'm not going to do that because I'm just trying to, show you these techniques. Then I would really like to create some kind of a border. So let's let's use the border that's already gray because that's going to match the colors that are green and gray. These kinds of borders, we need to make sure that they are built the right way. As you can see, they have this railing on the one side, so that needs to be on the outer edge. So I built it wrong. I need to rotate it. Then I'm just going to align it to the bridge, and yeah, I'll align it the other way around. That's a bit of a struggle with these kinds of asymmetrical networks, but you can easily make it work. It's not that difficult. And then I'm just going to put it on the side of the road and do some kind of height alignments just like that. So this is going to put some kind of volume on the upper side, and as you can see now from the side, it's looking really good. It might be not looking that great, yeah, from below, but you can easily do something about it. I'm actually going to show you. Why not? Let's take, for example, I'm not really sure if I have it in here. I might not, but let's even treat that with the networks. So, for example, city walls network, we have these flat networks. I don't know, for example, this plastic network, and I do believe that it is rendered from below. Yeah, it is. So you can easily just put that below the bridge. All right. So I'm not going to do that. You all probably know how that would be. Now, let's just say that I would like to make this double-decker bridge like really long. It's not going to have these pillars like this. And I would like to create maybe a suspension or cable stayed, okay? I'm gonna do both. So I would probably extend these pillars so that they go and create the pylons, the bases for all these cables. I'm actually going to do the same thing for the other side, align heights with this one. Yeah, when I clipped the textures, I did a bit of an oopsie in here. So I would either, it's kind of already broken, so you would have to just deal with procedural object conversions a bit differently, but you probably get the idea how it needs to be anyway. So I'm going to take the cable that's intended for these kinds of works. So for example, this one, again, align it with the shape of the bridge. Then I would put it to the pillar, something like that, put it on the higher side. By the way, these cable stayed bridges, when you're building the cables, usually the cables are not connecting at one point on the pylon, but the cables that are going the furthest away, they're obviously the highest, right? That kind of makes sense. Otherwise, they would be crossing each other, and we don't want that. So now I'm going to copy paste again this the same pillar. I'm going to hold Alt, so I'm just going to copy it into the same orientation. I'm going to move it slightly lower, and obviously picking it up in here, I'm going to move it. Oh, come on. It's a bit fiddly, as you can see in there, and there we go. No, I don't want both of them. I only want the one. There we go. And make it go slightly higher. All right. So this is a bit fiddly. Obviously, this needs some precision to make it work. All right. And then you would just continue. I'm not going to do that all the way. Now let's just say that we would like to create a suspension bridge. Why not? So I'm just going to take the cable again. I'm going to put it on the other side. Now, suspension bridges, we can either make them with a single network or two networks. Suspension bridges, usually they have the cable that is not straight, obviously, like the cable stayed bridges, but it's a bit angled, and on the lowest point, it's not going all the way to the road. It's not really connecting to it, obviously, because that's why we have all those vertical elements that we can add later. But I'm just going to do 1/2 of it for simplicity, okay? Now, in here, I would use, again, node controller. I would go to the cable, and I would play with the vertical direction again and make sure that it's not going to be flat, okay? So something like this. This is a lot fiddly. This is going to be probably taking a bit longer time. Actually, the lower part should be 0 in here, because that makes sense. The lower part is going to be perfectly horizontal, right? The lowest point of the cable is going to be horizontal. But you could, for example, play around with the direction length, which is going to make that shape much better, okay? So that's, for example, that. We would copy paste that to the other side. By the way, suspension bridges, unlike on that vanilla highway, they need to be usually on the anchoring side. Well, not usually, but almost every time, they are much shorter, and they might be a bit straighter because there is going to be a lot of tension force applied to them. So you would do something like that. I really don't want to waste time with this in the video, but the point is that there needs to be some kind of an anchor, okay? Some kind of anchor point, like a big, usually concrete block. So let me, for example, super quickly do it with just using this pillar. You know, I'm just going to put this pillar right there, and then I would take, just like in here before, just like I did with these, I would create the cables. I would probably make the cables much thinner than I did with that technique before, and I would obviously need to make them much denser as well. So what I would need to do here, probably with procedural objects, I would make sure that first the cable is perfectly aligned. So let me just do procedural object like this. Make it aligned to the segment. It doesn't really change anything, but as you can see, when I now open it with PO, then I have this these axes. I have them perfectly oriented to the road, which is important because now I can just move them like this freely, and it's always going to be moved on the edge of the road. All right. And what I would do is I would just copy paste it like this. And with Move It, we have now the spacing option. Well, we already had it for a long time, so I can just space it like this super easily by holding Control, okay? And then, unfortunately, I would have to go one by one and do these kinds of alignments so that it all fits. But you probably get the idea how this needs to be, all right? Also, if you want to create your completely custom truss bridges or truss structures, then you can do that with procedural objects very easily using letters, especially the letters, you know, M, V, N, and all of these other ones. I'm, for example, going to use the letter M. And what I would do in procedural objects, I would first, you need to already convert it into PO from selecting it, because these, they require the texture. So I'm just going to convert it into PO. I'm not going to apply any texture because they are already by default flat like this. And I can just repaint them with PO. I'm just going to make them blue, whatever. And if I wanted to put it, for example, below this road, then the easiest thing to do is just take them with Move It first, and then align it to that network that you have there, right? That's just going to make it so much more convenient. Then you are going to go back into PO and going to go into the rotation X and put it to 90, all right? Or, you know, minus 90 if you really wanted to have it the other way around. Now I'm just going to move it where I want it to, or, you know, I'm just going to quickly do it outside so you can see better what I'm doing. I would go into the scaling. I would probably scale it how I want it to. This is probably a bit too wide, so something like that. Or I can just upgrade the individual vertices, do, for example, this, like that, and these kinds of different changes. You know, you probably get the idea, right? But then I would just go and hold Control, so I can do these kinds of copy pasting, and then procedural object remembers the distance, so it's going to snap, and I can just copy it all the way like this. And I can create my own custom truss beams really quickly with PO. They are of course not going to look as detailed as, for example, the trusses that are already in the game like that on the networks, but if you are trying to go for high customization or some really big structures where you're just not going to look at them at you know, that close distance, then it's just going to be fine. And obviously, in the end, you can just combine all of these different techniques together. So you might be starting with, for example, the network technique, which is the simplest, or, well, actually the simplest is the one where you're just going to use the bridge just straight out of the box, or you can just customize it, later. So, for example, in one of my series, I used this particular bridge, and then I made a double-decker by just adding another network on top of it. I slightly changed the pillars so that it's going to match the shape and, these kinds of things. And obviously these kinds of either buildings or props as the structures, you can highly customize them. You can just take the vertices, really play around with the positions and create whatever kind of bridge structure you want. So that was kind of the point of this video, to just get you started with all of these different techniques and create absolutely original and completely custom bridges that no one else ever did before you. Anyway, that's going to be it for this tutorial. Thank you for sitting through it. Sorry it was a bit longer because I just wanted to show you all these different techniques. If you found it helpful, if you are going to build your own custom bridges in City Skylines in the game, then you can definitely help this video to go forward by clicking the thumbs up button, leaving some comments, sharing the video if you think that someone else might find it helpful, and you can also subscribe to the channel if you are new here. And if you want to directly support the channel, you can become the channel member. I really do appreciate all the supporters that we do have right now. Thank you guys so much. All right, so that's going to be it. Stay tuned for more, and goodbye.